Alright, so today we're going to be talking about Victorian encounters with killer snakes back in the 1800s. Now today we call the lion the king of the jungle, but to the Victorians, and in particular their journalists, their popular fiction writers and their novelists, it was the snake which was the real king of the jungle. Now there was a multitude of popular fiction magazines, which also carried journalism as well, but were available to readers, and particularly the ones on the screen were for young readers. Sons of Britannia and the Boys of England, for instance, featured short stories in which the heroes were often colonial soldiers who ventured into the jungle and fought the natives, quote unquote, or did battle with fearsome animals, including serpents. Now, when Victorian boys' magazines and journalists featured snake stories in their columns, the snakes were very generalised, so there was rarely an attempt by any writer to identify a specific species. There was just big snakes, which we might assume was the reticulated python, and perhaps smaller venomous snakes, which we can probably assume was the king cobra. And further to this, snakes were used in three ways. They were, 1, a tool of colonial natives' treachery. Number 2, the snakes were depicted as invaders of the human realm. And number 3, the snake was a symbol of when people had ventured too far into the jungle. So in Victorian popular culture, the serpent, not the lion, was the king of the jungle. But let's deal with the first. Snakes as a tool of natives' treachery. Now, the big bogeyman, if you like it, in this category was the snake charmer. They were viewed as potentially criminal, the lowest caste, quote unquote, of Hindus, and they were to be feared because they could potentially use their snakes to attack British colonisers. In Paul Herring's Comrades in Peril, one Indian snake charmer is annoyed that his master, a Rajah, favours British people at his royal court, so he decides to put on a show of snake charming, and he plans, by doing this, to get one of his snakes to attack the British hero, Sidney. But Sidney, the heroic British hero, anticipates this, and just as the serpent's about to strike, he beheads it with his knife. These stories, of course, of snake charmers using their snakes to attack British colonisers were part and parcel of that Orientalist discourse identified by Edward Said, in which the people, and particularly the eastern peoples of the empire, were stereotyped as treacherous, potentially evil. In fact, one newspaper at the time, titled The Friend of India, decided to categorise Indian people based on how similar their personality and physical appearance was to snakes. And because of this, the Indian people were, quote, 10 times more the children of the devil. It was, of course, blatant racism, but it is an example of how the Orientalist discourse pervaded journalism as a whole. But not all snake charmers were bad. So there was one hero of a boys' periodical called Mahmood the Snake Charmer, and he used his snakes to fight crime and evildoers in colonial India. But Mahmood is very much the exception rather than the rule. Now, in real life, snakes usually prefer to avoid human contact altogether, but in the Victorian and Edwardian eras, several stories appeared in newspapers where snakes, particularly cobras, who seem to be always featured in their columns, several stories appeared where they invaded humans' houses. Now, one famous fictional representation of a cobra invading a family home occurred in Rudyard Kipling's Rikki Tikki Tavi, which tells the story of two fearsome cobras, Nag and Nagaina, who invade an Anglo-Indian's family home, but are defeated by a brave mongoose named Rikki. Kipling knew how to build suspense. He said, "At the foot of the bush there came a low hiss, a horrid cold sound that made Rikki Tikki jump back 2 clear feet. Then inch by inch, out of the grass rose up the head and spread hood of Nag, the big black cobra, and he was 5 feet long from head to tail. When he lifted 1/3 of himself clear from the ground, he stayed balancing to and fro exactly as a dandelion tuft balances in the wind. And he looked at Rikki Tikki with the wicked snake's eyes that never changed their expression. I am Nag, look and be afraid. But believe it or not, mongooses can actually get the better of cobras, as the Friend of India reported in 1872. For in 1872, a mongoose and a cobra came face to face. The Friend of India reported that the snake was a large cobra, 4 foot 10.5 inches in length, the most formidable cobra I have seen. He was turned into an enclosed outer room or veranda about 20 foot by 12 foot, and at once coiled himself up, with head erect about 10 or 12 inches from the ground, and began to hiss loudly. The mongoose was a small one of its kind, very tame and quiet, but exceedingly active. When the mongoose was put into the rectangle, it seemed scarcely to notice the cobra, but the latter, on the contrary, appeared at once to recognise its enemy. The mongoose, to the surprise of all, made a sudden spring at the cobra and bit it in the inside of the upper jaw about the fang, and instantly jumped back again. Blood flowed in large drops from the mouth of the cobra. It is now easy to see how the fight would end. The moral of that story being, if you're ever abroad and a cobra infests your house or the hotel where you're staying, try and seek out a mongoose, and they'll do the job for you. Now, there was one fictional boy hero, the Harry Potter of his day, named Jack Harkaway, who, try as he might, could never seem to escape snakes. He always seemed to encounter a snake in every story. And he was so popular, this guy, that newsagents were once found fighting amongst each other to get the latest copies of his periodical from the publishers. In one adventure of Jack's, called Jack Harkaway After School Days, he joined a sailing ship, and on board, in a box, is a big snake. We don't, again, know what type of snake it was. It was just big. Anyway, thinking of having a laugh, Jack lets it out. Big mistake. It was, as you can see on the quote, fully 15 feet long. The snake, astonished at his unexpected freedom, raised his ugly head and glared savagely at Jack, who picked himself up and retreated to a safe distance. "Morning, governor," he said, nodding his head. "How do you find yourself?" The python's only reply to this was to uncoil himself and glide out of his box onto the floor. Jack was rather astonished at his prodigious size. He did not think he was half so big or formidable, and he was rather sorry he let him out. Nevertheless, being the hero of the tale, Jack grabs the nearest weapon to him, which is an axe, and then he beheaded the snake. But now we're going to venture into the actual jungle and see how colonial explorers fought with snakes. The snake was the undisputed monarch of the jungle, especially in the biggest selling novels of the Victorian era, George Reynolds' Mysteries of London and Mysteries of the Court of London. In one part of the novel, one of the characters is transported to the penal colony of Van Diemen's Land. He escapes from a penal colony and has to venture into the jungle, and there one of his comrades meets a very untimely end. Then Blackley rose and went farther into the wood. At length there was a strange rustling amongst the trees at a little distance, and then the cries of indescribable agony fell upon our ears. In a short time the cries ceased altogether. His fate was that which we had suspected. An enormous snake was coiled around the wretch's corpse, licking it with his long tongue to cover it with saliva for the purpose of deglutition. But there were some heroes as well, and these people went into the jungle and fought huge snakes. So the value of physical fitness was really promoted in the late Victorian era, because being physically fit would help their soldiers, the British soldiers, survive in the inhospitable colonies. And Brits thought that they were the master race. They had to prove themselves lord of creation, and then this idea was propagandized in popular fiction, like you can see here. And so the heroes of tales in the Boys' Comic Journal or the Gentleman's Journal went into the jungle to fight snakes, and of course win, and of course bag the girl at the end of the day. And lastly, these tropes are still with us. In Live and Let Die, the natives, quote unquote, use snakes to attack white people. In the movie Venom, a black mamba finds its way into a family home. And of course in Anaconda, the serpent is used as a symbol of the danger that lurks in the deep, deep jungle.